Welcome to Mixie Veteran Stories, where untold sacrifices, forgotten salutes, and silent heroes finally get the spotlight they deserve. Today's story doesn't begin with a verdict or a judge's gavel. It begins outside the courtroom, on a bench in the hallway, where an old man sat alone, ignored by the very system he once served. But before the final ruling was handed down, 47 Marines would walk in and block the door in total silence. Stay with us to the end, because what happened next redefined justice for a forgotten father. It was a sweltering Thursday afternoon at Franklin County Courthouse, the kind of day where even the stone pillars seemed to sweat. Inside, reporters filled the gallery, murmuring about the high-profile trial set to begin. A senior Marine officer faced charges of corruption and cover-up, an explosive case with implications that reached all the way to D.C. But while cameras clicked and voices rose in excitement, an old man sat quietly on a wooden bench just outside Courtroom 2B. His name was Harold Miller, 81 years old. His spine, once straight with command, was slightly bowed by time and grief. He wore his full USMC dress blues, navy coat with red piping, medals carefully pinned, white gloves tucked beneath one arm. On the bench beside him sat his cover, folded neatly. His boots were polished to a dull shine. Most people didn't notice him. A few glanced, confused. One clerk assumed he was there for the wrong courtroom. A security guard asked if he was lost. "No," Harold said gently. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." What they didn't know was that Harold wasn't just another aging veteran. He was the father of Major David Miller, a whistleblower Marine who had died mysteriously 2 years earlier after exposing the very corruption now on trial. Harold had come hoping to speak, to honor his son, to remind the court what this case truly meant, but he had been denied. Not a relevant witness, no standing, limited capacity inside the gallery. So he sat outside, not bitter, not angry, just present. Because when a man has nothing left to give, he offers his silence. And when the system forgets your voice, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait. What no one expected as the courtroom doors closed behind the lawyers and officials was that justice hadn't even arrived yet. But it was on its way, and it was wearing dress blues. Hallway had mostly cleared. Inside, the judge was calling the court to order. Outside, Harold Miller remained seated, unmoving, unreadable. But inside his chest, a story pounded like a drum. A story no one in that courtroom had been willing to hear. Not even when it cost his son his life. Major David Miller hadn't just been a Marine. He had been one of the Corps' rising stars, honored, decorated, respected. But more than that, David had something many feared: integrity. 2 years earlier, he had discovered a pattern: unauthorized supply transfers, falsified combat reports, and dangerous deployments sent for political theater. When he brought it to his superiors, he was told, "Let it go." But David didn't know how to let go of the truth. So he went higher. And then he was gone. Officially, it was ruled an accident, a training incident. Mechanical failure. But Harold knew. Every Marine father knows the difference between risk and retribution. He had begged for answers, filed petitions, written letters to everyone from the Department of Defense to the local VA office. Most replies came in envelopes with polite fonts and no substance. Some didn't come at all. Then came the arrest. General Samuel Brenner, a commanding officer once praised for cleaning up operations overseas, was suddenly facing charges of conspiracy and obstruction. An anonymous leak had revealed hundreds of falsified logs, most of them traced back to the same year David had died. The trial brought headlines, reporters, protesters, politicians, but not Harold. He wasn't invited, not listed as family, not summoned as a witness, just a name with no clearance. "We'll do our best to represent your son's legacy," they told him on the phone. But how could anyone speak of his son without knowing the boy who used to fall asleep on his chest in a baby-sized camo onesie? Who could capture the man who wrote poetry between deployments? Who still called his father Gunny even after earning his own rank? Harold had watched David grow from a child mimicking salutes to a leader who commanded real ones. He had taught him the Marine values, honor, courage, commitment. But David had gone one step further. He had lived them when it wasn't safe to, and now the world was trying to bury him in red tape and official records. That's why Harold had put on his dress blues, not for ceremony, not for nostalgia, but because if his son's name was going to be spoken in that courtroom, it deserved to be witnessed by someone who remembered the sound of it before medals were ever pinned beside it. He sat outside not to wait for justice, but to be justice's reminder. Because if no one else was going to show up for his son, he would. Even if they kept him outside the door. Even if no one turned their head. Even if the judge never looked his way. Harold didn't need a seat inside. He had something better. He had a promise made over a folded flag, and the quiet resolve of a father who knew that the fight for truth doesn't end when the war is over. It ends when silence wins. And Harold Miller was not about to let that happen. Inside the courtroom, opening statements had begun. The prosecution laid out its evidence. Logbooks, falsified reports, transfers authorized under false pretenses. The defense countered with procedure, protocol, and doubt. It was business as usual, controlled, clean, and sterile. But outside, on the second-floor corridor of the courthouse, something was shifting. Harold sat with his hands folded over his cane, staring blankly at the courtroom doors. The hallway was quieter now. Most of the public had gone inside, and the guards were relaxed, chatting near the stairwell. A janitor pushed his mop bucket past Harold without a word, and then came the sound. Not loud at first, just a faint thudding. Rhythmic, heavy, footsteps, boots. One of the guards turned, eyebrows raised. The thudding grew louder, echoing up the stairwell like the pulse of something long buried awakening. The first Marine appeared at the top of the stairs, then another, then 4 more, all of them in USMC dress blues, each with medals gleaming across their chests, white gloves, solemn expressions. They walked 2 by 2 in complete silence, and they didn't stop. Harold's eyes widened. One by one, the Marines filled the hallway, forming 2 rows that stretched from the courtroom doors all the way down the corridor, 23 on one side, 24 on the other. 47 in total. The security guards froze. One reached for his radio, unsure what to call this. Reporters down in the lobby began whispering. A junior clerk peeked around the corner, eyes wide. But the Marines said nothing. They simply stood at attention, still, unshaking. Harold slowly rose from the bench, using his cane to lift himself. His body trembled, but his eyes locked forward. One of the Marines stepped out of formation and walked toward him, a woman maybe in her late 30s. Her ribbons marked her as a combat veteran, her posture sharp as a blade. "Gunnery Sergeant Miller," she said quietly, with a respect reserved only for legends. "Permission to stand with you, sir." Harold blinked, stunned. What is this?" She straightened. "We heard you weren't allowed inside, so we're making sure no one goes in until someone listens to you." The hallway fell completely silent. Harold looked down the line at faces young and old, black and white, men and women. Some he recognized, others he didn't. But every one of them held the same fire in their eyes. Not anger, loyalty. They weren't here for a protest. They weren't here to make a scene. They were here to honor a father and the son who had once bled for their truth. "I don't deserve this," Harold whispered. The female Marine stepped closer. "Sir, your son deserved justice, and you deserve to see it happen." He looked at her hand, steady, gloved, offered in support. And for the first time in years, Harold Miller reached out, not as a veteran, not as a soldier, but as a father needing someone to walk with him through the weight of silence. He took her hand. The door to the courtroom creaked open. A court officer stepped out, startled by the wall of Marines. What is going on here?" The captain answered for them all. "We're not leaving until Gunnery Sergeant Miller is allowed inside." Inside the courtroom, murmurs began. The judge looked up. A bailiff whispered in his ear. The camera crews turned toward the door, where the sound of synchronized boots had begun to echo louder than any testimony. And for once, the system paused, because something greater than rules had just entered the building. Something dressed in blue, something wrapped in silence, something carrying the weight of every soldier who never got to speak for themselves. 47 Marines and one father. At first, the court didn't know how to respond. Judges don't typically take orders from Marines. Court officers don't pause proceedings for silent salutes. But there was something about the way those 47 uniforms stood, motionless, shoulder to shoulder like a wall of living principle, that forced everyone to stop pretending this was just another day in court. Inside, the murmurs grew louder. Journalists craned their necks. The judge, visibly confused, finally ordered a recess. "We appear to have a situation." And just like that, the doors opened. Harold Miller stepped into the courtroom not with a badge or subpoena, but with honor at his back. The Marines didn't follow him inside. They didn't need to. Their message had already echoed far beyond the courthouse walls. He was given a chair in the gallery. No press, no microphone, just a seat at last. The courtroom that had once denied him now sat in silence as Harold removed his cover and looked toward the bench. For several moments he said nothing, and then, unexpectedly, the judge invited him to speak. "Mr. Miller, if you have something to say relevant to this case, you may do so." Relevant. That word had haunted him for months. And now, finally, it opened the door. Harold stood, slowly, painfully. His voice was soft but unshaken. "My son," he began, believed that truth mattered more than his career, more than safety, more than his life. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He told the story like a soldier would, plain, honest, direct. He spoke of honor, betrayal, and the price of silence. He recited from memory the last message David had sent him before his death. "Dad, if anything happens to me, promise me you won't let it be buried." When Harold finished, the courtroom was still. The judge nodded once. The trial resumed. But something had changed. That night, the video hit social media. A courthouse intern had recorded it. The line of Marines, the silent protest, the old man walking between them. It spread like wildfire. Veterans reposted it. News anchors cried on air. Hashtags exploded. #Honor Harold, #Justice for David, number 47 Marines. Calls flooded the courthouse demanding justice, not just for Major David Miller, but for every whistleblower who died unheard. Veteran groups offered support. Civil rights advocates stepped in. Politicians scrambled to react. Harold didn't chase the headlines. He stayed home. He received hundreds of letters, some from Marines who had served with his son, others from fathers who had lost their own. One simply read, "You reminded us that silence is not surrender." Even the Pentagon took notice. A senior official requested to meet him. New evidence surfaced. The trial grew deeper, stronger, louder, and none of it would have happened if 47 Marines hadn't said nothing in exactly the right way. 2 months later, the trial ended. General Brenner was found guilty on multiple counts: obstruction, falsifying reports, and abuse of command. The court didn't just acknowledge the corruption, it acknowledged the cover-up that cost Major David Miller his life. More importantly, the Department of Defense formally cleared David's name. His record was restored. A posthumous medal was issued. And at a small ceremony in Quantico under a gray sky and light drizzle, Harold Miller stood before a folded flag for the second time in his life. This time, it wasn't handed to him in shameful silence. This time, it came with words that mattered. For integrity beyond the call of duty, for a legacy that forced the system to look itself in the mirror. Harold didn't speak at the podium. He didn't need to. The image of him accepting that second flag, with 47 Marines standing behind him again, said everything. Back at home, Harold kept the two flags side by side on the shelf above his fireplace. One belonged to a son. The other belonged to a fight that never should have been his to carry alone. He still wore his dress blues every Sunday, still polished his boots by hand. But now, people greeted him by name. Strangers thanked him. Local schools invited him to speak. One teacher said, "You taught my students more in 1 hour about courage than I could in a semester." But Harold didn't see himself as a teacher. He saw himself as a father who kept a promise. One morning, a young Marine knocked on his door. Uniform pressed, eyes clear. "Sir, I just wanted to say, I'm serving because of your son, and because of you." Harold nodded. "Then serve with truth." The young man saluted and walked away. Harold closed the door gently, smiled, and whispered, "That one got through the door."